David was now the king of Judah, but the rest of the country was still divided. After Saul died, there was a lot of confusion about who should lead. David waited in Hebron for 7 years while the nation decided what to do. Saul's general Abner didn't want David to rule. He took Saul's last son, Ishbosheth, and made him king over the northern tribes. This started a long civil war between the two sides. The war was messy. At the Pool of Gibeon, the two armies met. They decided to let 12 men from each side fight to settle the dispute, but it just led to more blood and more bitterness. The fighting was intense. David's side kept getting stronger while Saul's side got weaker. Eventually, even the generals started to realize that the war was destroying the country. After a disagreement with Ishbosheth, Abner switched sides. He went to Hebron and promised to bring all of Israel over to David. David welcomed him and made a peace treaty, but Joab was angry because Abner had killed his brother in battle. Even though David had made a peace deal, Joab took matters into his own hands and murdered Abner in secret. David was devastated. He didn't want to start his reign with a political assassination. He led the whole nation in mourning to show everyone that he wanted peace, not revenge. Then, 2 of Ishbosheth's own men murdered him in his sleep and brought his head to David, thinking David would be happy. But David was horrified. He told them he wouldn't reward anyone for killing an innocent man. With Saul's family gone, all the tribes finally came to David. They remembered the promise God made to him years ago. At 30 years old, David finally became the king of a united Israel. David needed a capital city that didn't belong to just one tribe. He chose Jerusalem, which was held by a group called the Jebusites. They mocked him, saying the city was so strong that even the blind could defend it. David found a way into the impenetrable city. He told his men that whoever went up the water shaft first would become commander. Joab took the lead, and the city that once mocked David fell in a single night. David made Jerusalem his home and the capital of the whole nation. It became known as the City of David. As he grew more powerful, he realized that the Lord was the one establishing his kingdom. Once David was settled in his palace, his mind turned to God. He felt bad that he had a beautiful home, while the Ark of the Covenant was still in a temporary tent. He wanted to build something permanent for the Lord. God sent Nathan with a message. He told David that he wouldn't be the one to build the temple, but God promised that David's descendants would rule forever. This was the famous promise that shaped Israel's future. David was overwhelmed by God's promise. He went and sat before the Lord, praying and asking, "Who am I, Lord, that you have brought me this far?" He accepted that his family was now part of something much bigger than himself. It was time to bring the ark to its new home. David led a massive parade into Jerusalem. He was so happy that he danced through the streets in front of everyone, celebrating that God's presence was finally in the capital. But not everyone was happy. David's wife Michal saw him dancing and thought he was acting like a fool. She criticized him for losing his dignity as a king, but David told her he would gladly act even more humble for God. David remembered the promise he made to his best friend, Jonathan. He asked if there was anyone left from Saul's family. He wanted to show them kindness, even though in those days, new kings usually got rid of the old king's family. David brought Mephibosheth to the palace. He gave him back all of Saul's land and told him he would always eat at the royal table. It was a beautiful act of loyalty and grace. Years later, when it was springtime, the time of year when kings usually went out to lead their armies, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. He sent his general, Joab, to handle the war while he enjoyed the peace of the palace. One evening, David was walking on his roof when he saw a woman bathing in a nearby courtyard. She was very beautiful. Instead of turning away, David kept watching, letting his curiosity get the better of him. The woman was Bathsheba. She was the wife of Uriah, one of David's most loyal soldiers. She was simply following the religious laws of purification, never imagining the king would be looking down at her. David asked around to find out who she was. Even though he found out she was married to his own soldier, he sent messengers to bring her to the palace. David was using his power to get what he wanted. A few weeks later, Bathsheba sent a secret message back to David. She told him the news that would change everything. She was pregnant. David knew this was a huge problem that could lead to a scandal. To cover up what happened, David called Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, back from the war. He hoped Uriah would spend the night at home so everyone would think the baby was his. But Uriah was too loyal. He refused to go home to his comfortable bed while his fellow soldiers were still sleeping in tents on the battlefield. He slept at the palace gate instead, which ruined David's plan. David became desperate. he wrote a secret letter to his general, Joab. He told Joab to put Uriah in the front lines where the fighting was the most dangerous, and then to pull the other soldiers back so Uriah would be killed. The plan worked. Uriah was killed in battle just like David wanted. To the public, it looked like a tragic loss of a brave soldier, but David knew the truth. He had basically murdered his own man. When Bathsheba heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. Once her time of grieving was over, David brought her to the palace and married her. He thought his secret was finally safe. But God was not happy with what David had done. He sent the prophet Nathan to talk to him. Nathan told David a story about a rich man who was very greedy. David didn't realize the story was actually about him. David was furious at the man in Nathan's story. But then Nathan dropped the bombshell. You are the man. He exposed everything David had done in secret. The adultery, the lies, and the murder of Uriah. David didn't try to hide it anymore. He didn't execute Nathan for speaking up. Instead, he admitted everything. He confessed that he had failed God. Because he repented, Nathan told him God would forgive him, but there would still be painful consequences. David spent days in deep prayer. He wrote a famous song of repentance asking God to wash away his sins and give him a clean heart. Even though he was still the king, he felt like a beggar asking for mercy. The first consequence was a tragic one. The baby David and Bathsheba had together became very ill. David fasted and laid on the ground for 7 days, hoping God would spare the child's life. When the baby died, David did something that surprised everyone. He stopped mourning, washed himself, and went to worship. He knew he couldn't change the past, and he trusted that he would see his child again in heaven. As the years went by, trouble started growing in David's own family, just like Nathan said it would. His oldest son, Amnon, became obsessed with his half-sister, Tamar. Instead of helping him, his cousin Jonadab gave him a plan to trick her. Tamar went to help Amnon thinking he was really sick, but it was a trap. Amnon hurt her, and then, in a cruel twist, he kicked her out of his house in disgrace. Tamar was devastated and humiliated. When her brother Absalom found out what Amnon had done, he was filled with a quiet, dangerous rage. He told Tamar to stay with him and keep quiet for now. When King David heard the news, he was furious. But because Amnon was his oldest son, he didn't punish him. This was a huge mistake. By doing nothing, David allowed the bitterness in his family to grow. Absalom didn't say anything to Amnon, not a word of praise or a word of anger. He just waited. For 2 full years, he let his hatred grow, planning for the day he would take justice into his own hands. 2 years later, Absalom invited all the king's sons to a sheep shearing festival. He acted like everything was fine, but it was all a trap. He had waited a long time to get his revenge for what happened to Tamar. When Amnon was relaxed and happy from the wine, Absalom's servants struck him down. The other brothers fled in terror, thinking Absalom was going to kill them all. The peace of the royal family was officially shattered. When the news reached David, he was heartbroken. At first, he thought all his sons were dead. When he found out it was only Amnon, he was relieved. But he was still crushed by the tragedy of one son killing another. Absalom didn't stick around to face the king's judgment. He fled the country and went to live with his grandfather in the city of Geshur. He stayed there in exile for 3 years, far away from his father. As time passed, David's anger at Absalom began to fade, and he started to miss him terribly. Joab the general noticed this. He decided to find a clever way to convince the king to bring Absalom home. Joab hired a wise woman to tell David a story that was actually a trap. She pretended her 2 sons had fought and one died, and now the neighbors wanted to kill her only remaining son. David promised to protect her son, not realizing he was judging his own situation with Absalom. David was smart. He realized Joab had set the whole thing up. He saw the point the woman was making. If he could show mercy to her son, he should be able to bring his own son back home. David allowed Absalom to return to Jerusalem, but there was a catch. He wouldn't let Absalom see his face. For 2 years, Absalom lived in the same city as his father, but was never invited to the palace. This only made Absalom more bitter. Finally, David gave in and welcomed Absalom back into the palace. They hugged and kissed, and it looked like the family was fixed. But on the inside, Absalom was already planning to steal his father's throne. Absalom started acting like he was already the king. He bought the best chariot and had 50 men run in front of him wherever he went. He was making himself the most popular man in Israel right under his father's nose. Absalom started getting up early every day to meet people at the city gates. He would tell them that their complaints were valid, but that the king had no one to listen to them. He was secretly turning the people against David by acting like he was the only one who cared about justice. After 4 years of plotting, Absalom told the king he needed to go to Hebron to fulfill a promise to God. David, trusting his son, told him to go in peace. He didn't realize that Hebron was where the rebellion would officially begin. Absalom sent secret messengers to every tribe in Israel. He told them that as soon as they heard the sound of the trumpet, they should shout, "Absalom is king in Hebron." The trap was set, and the news spread like wildfire across the country. The rebellion got even more dangerous when Ahithophel joined Absalom. He was David's top advisor and a very smart man. When David heard that his own friend had betrayed him, he was deeply hurt and began to pray for God to confuse Ahithophel's advice. When the news reached Jerusalem that everyone was following Absalom, David made a tough choice. He decided to leave the city immediately. He didn't want the holy city to be destroyed in a battle with his own son. David left Jerusalem with his loyal followers. Even some foreign soldiers who loved David insisted on going with him. He was a king without a palace again, heading back into the wild places where he had lived years before. The priests tried to bring the Ark of the Covenant with David, but David told them to take it back. He didn't want to use God's presence as a good luck charm. He trusted that God would decide his fate. As David climbed the Mount of Olives, he wept. He was barefoot and his head was covered as a sign of deep grief. It was one of the lowest moments of his life, being hunted by the son he had tried to love and protect. On the mountain, David met his friend Hushai. He realized he needed an insider in Absalom's camp. He sent Hushai back to Jerusalem to act as a spy and to try to give Absalom bad advice to help David escape. While David was fleeing, a man named Shimei followed them, shouting insults and throwing rocks at the king. David's soldiers wanted to kill him for the disrespect, but David told them to let him be. He felt that perhaps God was using this man's insults to humble him. In Jerusalem, Absalom had to make a choice. Ahithophel wanted to attack David immediately while he was tired. But David's spy, Hushai, convinced Absalom to wait and gather a bigger army. This delay gave David the time he needed to escape and prepare. Ahithophel was a genius, and he knew it. When he saw that Absalom had followed Hushai's bad advice instead of his own, he realized the rebellion was doomed. He went home, put his affairs in order, and took his own life. David reached the safety of Mahanaim, where loyal friends brought him food and supplies. He divided his army into 3 groups. Even though he was the one being hunted, he was starting to take control of the situation. As the army left for battle, David gave a command that surprised everyone. He told his generals to be gentle with Absalom. Despite the rebellion and the betrayal, David still loved his son and didn't want him killed. The battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. It was a disaster for Absalom's army. They were used to fighting on open ground, and the thick, tangled forest became their enemy. More men died because of the forest than from the actual fighting. As Absalom was riding through the woods to escape, his long, famous hair got caught in the branches of a large oak tree. His mule ran out from under him, leaving him hanging there, helpless and trapped. One of the soldiers found Absalom and told Joab. Even though the soldier refused to hurt the prince because of David's command, Joab didn't care. He believed that as long as Absalom lived, the kingdom would never be at peace. Back at the city, David was waiting for news. When the messengers arrived, they told him the battle was won. But David didn't ask about the victory, he only asked about his son. He was desperate to hear that Absalom was still alive. When David heard that Absalom was dead, he was completely destroyed. He didn't celebrate the victory. He went to his room and wept loudly, wishing he could have taken his son's place. His grief was so loud that the whole city could hear it. Joab was fed up. He told the king that by mourning the rebel who tried to kill him, he was insulting the loyal soldiers who had just fought for him. He forced David to put his feelings aside and act like a king again. The rebellion was over. The tribes of Israel invited David to come back and be their king again. He crossed the Jordan River to return to Jerusalem. It was a homecoming filled with both relief and the quiet sadness of everything he had lost. Even the people who had cursed David while he was fleeing came to ask for forgiveness. David's men wanted to punish them, but David chose mercy. He wanted to start this new chapter of his reign by bringing people together, not by shedding more blood. In his later years, David made one more big mistake by taking a census to see how powerful his army was instead of trusting God. When trouble followed, David took the blame. He bought a threshing floor on a hill to build an altar and ask for God's mercy. David knew he wouldn't be the one to build the temple, but He spent the end of his life making sure everything was ready for Solomon. He gathered the gold, the silver, the cedar, and even the blueprints, so his son would have everything he needed to succeed. When it was time for David to die, he called for Solomon. He didn't talk about his own victories, he talked about being faithful to God. He wanted Solomon to understand that a king's true strength comes from his obedience to the Lord. David died after ruling for 40 years. He was buried in Jerusalem, the city he had captured and made great. He left behind a united nation and a promise that his family would lead to something even greater in the future. Solomon took over the throne, and the kingdom entered a time of incredible peace and wealth. David's work had laid the foundation, and now Solomon was building the golden age of Israel that his father had always dreamed of. David was a warrior and a king, but he is remembered most for his heart. The songs he wrote, the Psalms, are still used by people all over the world today to find comfort in hard times and to give thanks in good times. David's story is a story of a human being, someone who was capable of great things and great mistakes. But because he always came back to God with a sincere heart, he became the standard for every king who came after him.
David's journey reminds us that God can use anyone who is willing to be honest and humble. His life shows us that it's never too late to turn back to the right path. If you enjoyed part 2 of the story of David, make sure to subscribe to Living Word Afrotales. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another story from the Word of God. Thank you for joining us for this journey through the life of the Shepherd King. We hope it has encouraged your heart today. Until next time, remember, you are seen, you are loved, and your story is held in the faithful hands of God. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next story.